my name's Gary Ford, Managing Director of Tiger Hobbies Limited, UK hobby importers and distributors, and welcome to part 5. In this part, we're going to look at Operation Watch on the Rhine, or what the Allies will know as the Battle of the Bulge. Now, the Americans are in the Ardennes resting. They've had a torrid time in the Battle of the Ardennes Forest, losing 55,000 casualties. Coupled with what they'd lost at Ardennes and a few other engagements, that's almost 70,000 casualties. With the loss of Antwerp in early September 1944, the Germans wanted that port back, and virtually not much longer were making plans to take the port back. Now, in December 1944, under the gaze of the Allies, they gathered an absolute massive force, some 400,000 men, backed up by 2,000 tanks and armoured fighting vehicles, plus a further 2,000 artillery pieces and another 2,000 aircraft. As the US Army was licking its wounds from the battles at Ardennes and Ardennes, that size of a German force would have been unbelievable to the Allies, as they thought it was virtually war over. But the Germans are now fighting almost on their own land and will be defending tooth and nail. By now, the Allies have got the port of Antwerp fully operational, and the supplies are flowing to the Allied armies, and the Allied armies are now confident that once organised, they can have another offensive into Germany in the new year. As a result, as I said earlier, many of the senior officers have started going on leave to places like London and Paris. The German army's objective was the port of Antwerp, and also getting to the River Meuse, just the other side of the Ardennes. Now, the German attack will consist of 4 armies. First, the 6th Panzer Army, commanded by Sepp Dietrich. This would have all the best equipment and all the so-called elite Waffen-SS panzer divisions. Below that was the 5th Panzer Army, commanded by Asso van Manteuffel. Just as large, maybe not the best equipment, but still fairly well equipped. Now, to the north of the 6th Army would be the 15th Army, which we spoke about earlier on, now providing northern flank protection, having fought the Americans at Ardennes, Ardennes and other places up the West Wall. And to the south of the 5th Army, the German 7th Army would also provide southern flank protection. What was holding the Germans up, though, was massive fuel shortages. Next to me is a massive 1/16th model of the King Tiger, probably the biggest one you can get in plastic kit form. In reality, this monster sucked fuel, so they will need to capture fuel for this operation to be successful. Now, what they did, they sent in a team of commandos led by Hitler's commando Otto Skorzeny to go forward in captured American vehicles dressed in American uniforms, talking American where possible, to cause chaos behind the enemy lines, but also to scout for bridges and, more importantly, fuel dumps. But this raid didn't go very well, and many of them were killed and captured by American forces, and who were captured were literally shot as spies. In my early series about D-Day, I talked about Group Captain Stagg, the meteorological man for the combined Allied forces going to D-Day. He was looking for great weather. Well, the German version of Group Captain Stagg was looking for exactly the opposite. He wanted absolutely terrible weather, and forecast for mid-December up until early January was one of the worst lower pressures in Europe that they'd ever seen. Thus, the whole system would be clagged down, ideal for getting the German army underneath and stopping superiority of Allied air power interfering with this attack. Early, on the 16th of December 1944, 1,600 German guns opened up on unsuspecting green and exhausted troops of the Allies, or the Americans. At the same time, in one of my early series, I mentioned a V2 attack on a cinema in Antwerp, and this happened on that day. And that V2 actually didn't kill 400, I stated, actually killed 600. In fact, as many British soldiers would die in that cinema, they would actually die in the Battle of the Bulge. The initial German advance was hampered by actually poor traffic conditions. They got that much equipment, tanks, assault guns, you know, Panzer Grenadiers. They were in huge traffic jams. Now, luckily, it was all covered by horrendous weather. Otherwise, this would have been prime target for superior Allied air forces. The 6th Panzer Army was led by Kampfgruppe Piper, famed Panzer Commander Joachim Piper's attack group, consisting of about 5,000 personnel with some 600 vehicles, including the largest number of this massive King Tiger. And elements went to a place called the Elsenborn Ridge, where they met the green and untested troops of the 99th Infantry Division. But rather than a pushover, these troops fought doggedly. For every American unit running away or being captured, other American units, small units, were fighting fiercely to stop the Germans. And I mentioned earlier on, General Leslie J. McNair's training program, training soldiers from the ground up to be able to use their infantry weapons, no matter what they did in the American Army, came to fruition during the Battle of the Bulge, as not only untested troops and frontline troops, but also cooks, supply guys and clerks got in those trenches, started using their infantry weapons and stopped one of the most elite panzer units of the Second World War. Early on in Piper's advance, they came across a US artillery observation unit, I think called the 285, and after a brief firefight, destroying a number of their vehicles, captured about 160 prisoners. They didn't have time to deal with the prisoners, so they put them at a crossroads and put them under light guard before Piper's group moved on. Within about 20 minutes, an SS unit turned up. There was hardly any conversation with the guard. They just literally opened up with their machine guns onto these defenceless prisoners. Some 84 to 90 were killed, many of them with a bullet in the back of the head after, and were just literally left in the snow. Now, some got away, and word started spreading amongst the American forces. Pointless surrendering, because otherwise you're going to meet their fate. In fact, after the war, US military authorities would hunt down members of this unit for this horrendous crime. Kampfgruppe Piper turned south and bumped into the rest area of the 99th Infantry Division, destroying a number of AFEs and taking more prisoners and murdering more prisoners. He also captured 11 African American soldiers. These weren't just put to death, they were tortured in unspeakable terms before being killed. And yet, strangely, after the war, this crime was never investigated by the US military authorities. Kampfgruppe Piper moved on to a town called Stavelot, where they committed yet another atrocity. This time it was Belgian civilians. Now, this battle isn't a straight front line. You've got Americans here and Germans here and Americans here and Germans here. It's all very confusing. Now, after a firefight, destroying a number of American vehicles, they managed to capture the town of Stavelot. But more US forces were coming into the area, including the famed 82nd Airborne. Piper's forces then turned their attention to the town of Stermont, which was a tougher nut to crack, but managed to get his paratroopers to infiltrate their lines, and then after a massive fight managed to capture the town. But behind him, the US forces had recaptured Stavelot. Now, this was the high point of the German 6th Panzer Army's lead element, because they kind of pulled back to a place called Le Glaise, waiting for reinforcements. They basically run out of fuel, but no reinforcements came. And on the 23rd of December, Piper abandoned all his vehicles, including the valuable King Tigers, retreated back to German lines on foot. In part 6, we'll look at the Allies starting to get the upper hand, and Montgomery starting to come into the picture, and also the most famous incident of the Battle of the Bulge, the Siege of Bastogne.